In 2018, we celebrate the centenary of Australian resources and energy group Amma. For 100 years, Amma has provided support and leadership across Australia's mining, oil and gas and service sectors. And while the group has changed and evolved enormously, its mission has not wavered, ensuring the industry is an attractive place for investment and employment, creating wealth and prosperity for all Australians.
Yeah, I think the resource industry underpins a lot of the Australian way of life. If we look at a lot of the wealth that's been created in the country, it's come out of the resource industry.
So it brings development, it brings educational opportunities, employment opportunities. So it's a fundamental industry all around the world.
So I think for us as Australians, it's such an important part of our economy. And I think for the average Australian, they don't necessarily always see that, but what they do see is the hundreds of thousands of jobs.
Today, Amma has a presence in every state and territory, from the halls of Parliament to the red dirt of the Pilbara, from Bass Strait to Queensland's coal basins.
When you look at every aspect of the supply chain, whether it's a service provider on site, whether it's a mining contractor, whether it's the principal, whether it's across sectorial bounds, you'll find that there's a greater understanding in 2018 that Amma operates in all those areas.
In terms of Amma having a whole industry approach, I think that is actually one of its big strengths and probably one of the contributing factors to it still being around in 100 years.
Part of the secret of success is continuing to be relevant, continue to change over time. It's been flexible and adaptable, and I think anything that's lasted 100 years clearly has had to adapt and evolve with the changing needs of the sector.
Founded as the Australian Mines and Metals Association, the group's origins 100 years ago were modest, but based on the same principles as its work today. Its first president, Broken Hill miner George Charles Klug, spoke of repatriating returned soldiers from the Great War into productive, well-paid work. He saw great potential in Australian mining and better cooperation between employers and employees.
The world must bend its energies to the reweaving of the industrial fabric and the readjustment and improvement of the relations between employer and employed, to re-establish our industries on such a footing as will conduce to their preservation and expansion, the promotion of a better spirit between capital and labour, and the contentment amongst workers.
During the next few decades, big industrial changes drove demand for Amma's support. Labour reorganisations saw landmark strikes in coal and iron ore, the setting of industrial awards and the introduction of standard conditions and entitlements. The middle of the century also saw the mining industry develop and prosper. Amma grew and diversified.
I joined the association in 1955. I answered about a 2-inch, 1-column ad in the paper. The entire staff then were 2 men in Sydney and 2 men in Melbourne, and I think a part-time fella in Tasmania. There was a bit of a boost in the mining industry in Queensland, and I went up there to open a branch. It coincided with the Glomar 3 striking oil in Bass Strait and the development of the iron ore industry in Western Australia, and we were suddenly very busy. I'm very proud how we went from such a small organisation into a very important one.
During the 1970s, distinguished mining identity Sir R.V. Parbo became president as Australia began to create national wealth from its emerging oil and gas sector. As the Bass Strait and North West Shelf came to life, Amma's remit expanded significantly.
It's the wealth out of Bass Strait that actually underpinned a lot of the social changes that happened during the 70s. And without that wealth, we probably would never have been able to afford a lot of those social programs that were introduced through the Whitlam and then Fraser governments as well.
In the 80s, the petroleum industry was just really developing in Australia, and amazingly interesting to be part of that.
However, the workplace relations environment was challenging. Disputes and disunity affected the whole industry, and Amma took charge.
The changes that occurred in that 27 years that I was with Mines and Metals. The industrial relations, employee relations scene in the 70s was pretty toxic, and it was fairly evident by the mid-70s that things had to change. Around 1980, 81, 82, the members of Mines and Metals were saying, what are we going to do? And we started to lobby federal government ministers. The respect we had with those ministers enabled us to move straight into their chambers to talk to them and their advisors. We talked to our members and got their views, and we developed what we thought was a process to change the system that was poisoning Australian industry.
For the next 2 decades, Amma played a leading role in the biggest reforms of Australian workplace relations since Federation. In 1986, former President Charles Copeman courageously pursued industrial reform at Robe River, a game changer for the Pilbara's iron ore sector. The Way Ahead was released shortly after, foreshadowing great reforms implemented by the Keating and Howard governments through the 1990s.
The Way Ahead was really successful. We were able to convince those in power that what we were talking about on behalf of our members was what should be put into practice, and it led the John Howard government through John Howard and Peter Reith to changing the industrial relations laws.
Yeah, the people who are involved in Amma, the members area, they're pretty clear that Amma has a strong voice. We sit down and work out what the policy requirements are to basically to make the industry a good place to work, to invest and do good for the nation. So they know when those policy settings are put in place, we will pursue those policies as professionally and assiduously as we should.
The investment surge of the 2000s would see Amma become the organisation it is today, synonymous with the strategies and support that saw tens of thousands of people build the biggest wave of resources and energy projects ever in Australia's history. Today, the industry has entered an exciting new era driven by cutting-edge technology.
Look, the met sector, it's huge, and it's in different areas. It's in terms of engineering, the IT, the robotics. Australia are world leaders in this area as well, so we're not just doing it for our domestic market.
What you're seeing now with the automation of trucks, the automation of trains, etc., means that the workplaces are going to be more specific in the skill sets that they need.
So that whole autonomous world and the whole world of data and the ability to run big operations from thousands of kilometres away requires a whole lot of different thinking about how you structure your organisation and deal with the kind of people challenges that Amma has proven itself to be very good at over 100 years.
So it's just an evolution of the technology and the companies, and also going to deeper and deeper frontiers. You know, we're exploring deeper, and so there's still a lot to come.
So I think that's really the challenge going forward, is to make sure that we continue to manage change and to reinvent ourselves, either as an oil or gas industry, or as a resource sector, or as a employer group.
As we celebrate 100 years of Amma's history, we now look ahead to a bright future for resources and energy and all those within it, providing a bright future for all Australians.
A lot of the jobs, we don't know what will be there in 5 years' time, but be rest assured we've got a history and we will have a future.